Spectacular Spider-Man is one of the best Spider-Man adaptations to have ever been made. Since X-Men 97 is coming back, and yes, that trailer is really awesome, there is more hope now that Spectacular Spider-Man could actually return more than ever. As well as this, I actually believe that the fandom need this now more than ever, and I'm about to tell you why. So, here is why Spectacular Spider-Man must return. But before we get into that, I actually want to let you guys know that this is the second video in a two-part mini-series that me and my friend Ray over at Slightly Spider are actually making, considering the cultural significance of Spectacular Spider-Man coming back, and whether it's actually a good thing whether it comes back or not. Ray actually got the short end of the stick and basically made a video touting why it shouldn't be coming back and gave very, very good reasons. I definitely recommend you go and watch his video, but I'm going to be telling you why the show should just come back in general. So basically, I have two main reasons as to why it should come back. First and foremost, I think it's obvious, the fans. This is the most obvious point, but the fans want it and the hype has not died down. I think Spectacular Spider-Man shows its significance in the fandom purely based off how many people talk about it on a day-to-day basis. Like, if you go on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, whatever it may be, someone is talking about Spectacular Spider-Man somewhere. Heck, this video is me talking about Spectacular Spider-Man. Wow. The hype for the return of this show has been slowly creeping up and up and up over the last few years, and with Across the Spider-Verse's release last year, which included an appearance from Spectacular Spider-Man, it definitely elevates the hype even more. This is something that the fans want, and if a cult classic like X-Men 97 can make a return because of its fan significance, then Spectacular Spider-Man can too. I also want to point this out there that the main voice actor for Spectacular Spider-Man, Josh Keaton, is also a massive Spider-Man fan as well. So I mean, if the show ever came back, he'd 100% be on board. What I think is interesting about this point, though, is that in Ray's video, he mentions that the 90s animated Spider-Man show had more of an impact culturally than Spectacular Spider-Man did. And because of this, the 90s show has more grievance to make a return than Spectacular Spider-Man, and it would be more beneficial for the fandom and for fans alike to see the return of Christopher Daniel Barnes' version of the character rather than Josh Keaton's. But on that point, I have to disagree. Yes, I believe it's probably true that it had influence over things like the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films, and by proxy, a whole generation of Spidey fans that grew up with that version of the character, but Spectacular Spider-Man, since its release, has had the longevity in the fandom. Clearly, the people that were brought up on that show, and even people who weren't, are begging for its return, and I don't see nearly as much love for the 90s show in this regard, despite how highly people rate it. And I think this is reflected by his appearance in Across the Spider-Verse as well. I don't see Christopher Daniel Barnes' version of Spider-Man in Across the Spider-Verse, but I see Spectacular Spider-Man. This is definitely because of the cultural significance that Spectacular Spider-Man has had over the last, since, I don't know, what, 20 years now are we getting on to? The show's been out for 20 years almost. So because of that, I believe Spectacular Spider-Man should come back. Also, just a quick sub-point adjacent to my first point here. I also want to mention that Spectacular Spider-Man was left on a cliffhanger. And yeah, so was the 90s Spider-Man as well, but I believe their cliffhangers were slightly different. In the 90s show, it always felt like the character's natural progression was to go and find Mary Jane Watson. If you guys don't know, the 90s animated Spider-Man show ends with Madam Web and Spider-Man traveling the multiverse, trying to find the real version of Mary Jane Watson since she got lost in her previous season. However, I felt like this was a bittersweet ending in the way. Like, all the villains were defeated, all the characters had their natural progressions come to an end, and it felt like the nice ending was that we knew Peter Parker had won. We knew that he was going to go and find MJ and live happily ever after, and after all the hardship that Peter Parker had been put through throughout the 5 seasons, he was eventually going to get his happy ending, which I thought was a nice little touch to end the series on. It works, and it's comforting in knowing that after failing so many times, like I mentioned, Peter managed to get back up and is finally going to make things right. And I think even if there isn't a season 6, we just assume that he'd find Mary Jane and live happily ever after, like I mentioned. It's kind of similar to how Spider-Man 3 is accidentally a perfect ending to the Raimi trilogy, despite Sam Raimi wanting to do a Spider-Man 4, with plenty of room for another story about Peter and Mary Jane. Like, all the characters' arcs were finished, and everything kind of just came to a nice, slow stop. And yeah, there are more stories to tell, and I'm sure you could tell a 90s animated season 6 about Peter traveling the multiverse trying to find Mary Jane, but we don't really need that to know that he probably will succeed in the end. However, moving back to what this video is about, Spectacular Spider-Man dropped an absolute bombshell on us. Like, Norman Osborn's still alive? And it's not just that, there are so many unfinished arcs throughout the show, like the Miles Warren stuff, Peter and Gwen's relationship, Harry's downfall into villainy, Venom's return and the birth of Carnage, the Hobgoblin story that they set up, and a bunch of other stuff like Scorpion, Hydra Man, Peter's parents, and even a Kraven the Hunter comeback. So yeah, the show pretty much set a lot of this up in the second season, and it never ended up delivering. So let's move on to my second reason. Now this is a little bit more meta, so it's going to take some explaining. Basically, I feel like Spider-Man is a bit lost in media. Now, like I mentioned, this is going to be a very meta point, so that's why I wanted to talk about this last. And when I mean that Spider-Man is kind of lost, what I mean is that people who write Spider-Man, predominantly the movies, shows, comics, etc., anything that's mainstream, kind of, I don't know, love the multiverse right now. Like, we have No Way Home, we have the Spider-Verse movies, and we even have Marvel Spider-Man 2, which included multiversal elements. Plus, not to mention, it doesn't help that the thing that isn't the multiverse, the comics, actually aren't really that great. Apart from Ultimate Spider-Man, which is pretty good, but, you know, the 616 main continuity, yeah, that's bad. And yeah, No Way Home was great, Spider-Verse is obviously great, some of the best Spider-Man movies we've ever had, but I feel like we've strayed very far away from the kind of stories that made Spider-Man great in the first place. Now, I'm going to be a bit of a hypocrite here, because I've said many times I'm a massive advocate of going in a different direction with Spider-Man, doing something entirely different with the character, pursuing new stories, new characters, new villains, and kind of taking Peter Parker in a direction that he hasn't been before. And yes, the multiverse was that for a while, but I feel like that is being really overdone. And because we are just staying on this one thing, the multiverse and magic and all this kind of stuff, I felt like maybe Spider-Man's a little bit lost in the media, and it's kind of lost his charm in a way. And how does this tie into Spectacular Spider-Man? Well, the reason why this ties directly into Spectacular Spider-Man is because Spectacular Spider-Man is considered to be probably one of the best adaptations of a classical Spider-Man story that we have ever gotten. So therefore, if this show makes a return, it could kind of balance the scales a little bit. We could have the weird and wacky stories in the movies and, you know, the Spider-Verse films and the comics. They can stay bad, but that's fine, because Spectacular Spider-Man will give us that classical itch that we have for a high school traditional Spider-Man story that I think we've probably been missing for the last 5 to 10 years or so, I guess. Now, yes, Spider-Man Freshman Year, or whatever that show is called now, is hopefully gonna fill that void, but on the off chance that it's too in line with its MCU brand synergy, Spectacular Spider-Man would be the perfect show to fill this hole. People will also be mentioning MCU Spider-Man 4 because that looks like it's going to be a street level story and take Spider-Man back to basics. However, as of right now, the reports are that Sony apparently are pushing for a multiverse film for MCU Spider-Man 4, just like Spider-Man No Way Home. And if we know Sony, they always manage to get their way. But moving back to Spectacular Spider-Man, a Season 3 would be able to bring back characters like Gwen Stacy, classic Mary Jane Watson and Flash Thompson, and many other characters that a show like Spider-Man Freshman Year won't be able to do, since, like I mentioned, it is a show that is designed to have that synergy with the Marvel Cinematic Universe version of Spider-Man. And we know that that show is going to include other MCU characters like Doctor Strange and Daredevil, and yeah, I'm excited to see them show up in a Spider-Man show, but, you know, Spider-Man, I think, works on his own. Most of the best Spider-Man stories that have happened over the last 30 years or so have all come from comics and movies and shows where he's pretty much by himself and he doesn't really cross over with anyone else, even if he's in a cinematic universe or multiverse, or he's a part of a larger connected universe. Just to name a few, we're talking like Kraven's Last Hunt, we're talking Spider-Man Blue, we're talking Spectacular Spider-Man, the 90s show, obviously the Raimi trilogy, TASM 1, I could go on. But either way, I think despite everything, at the end of the day, with X-Men 97 coming back, potentially it gives us a new lease of life for Spectacular Spider-Man to potentially make a return under Marvel Animation. That is if Disney and Sony can come to some sort of agreement. And I definitely think it's on the cards. I mean, just look at Josh Keaton coming back to voice Spider-Man in Across the Spider-Verse. Like, if they're willing to put the character into, you know, one of the biggest Spider-Man films of the last 10 to 20 years, then why not bring him back? But either way, we're closer than ever, so keep pushing for it. Hashtag make Spectacular Spider-Man Season 3. I really want to see this show come back. Thank you for Ray for doing this collab with me. Like I said, if you haven't watched this video, make sure to go check it out. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care. Peace.